Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to the English session of this morning's second lecture. Our speaker today is Dr. Omrani. Shahriar Omrani was born in Iran and in Tehran, finished high school and medical school at the Tehran Medical University, graduated in 1978, moved to the United States and finished his internship and residency in psychiatry at the Long Island Jewish Hospital. He later moved to Los Angeles and began his practice. He's a board-certified psychiatrist with a private office and also works at the local hospitals in Los Angeles. He has been a member of the psychology boards in Southern California and American Psychological Association, and he has spoken extensively on multiple personality disorder, dissociative disorders, and post-traumatic disorders. He's currently in practice in Beverly Hills, and he's also a speaker at the Iranian radios. He is here to tell us about the interaction between psychology and politics, roots of terrorism, and the nuances of personalities that might interfere and promote terrorism. It is with great pleasure that I'd like to welcome Dr. Omrani. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate both the invitation and the nice presentation. Most of the things that we do in life involves politics and psychology, to the roots of things that we may not be aware of on a day-to-day basis. Since the dawn of man, every time someone tried to control someone else, they used politics, and most of the time through psychology. It's interesting that if I want to use an example, just consider this. If everyone here had a $100 bill, and I wanted to get that from you, there are many different ways that I could do that. The most primitive way is if I get a club and I attack each of you and get the money. That's very primitive and brute force, but I cannot be very successful. How many people can I attack? The other thing that I can do is that I can hit someone and show the club to the other people, scare them, and then they get their money. Control them would be more of a terrorism. But I could do something else. I can try to convince you that if you give me the $100, I make sure that you have a beautiful house after you die. I'll send you to Hawaii, and I'm the only one who knows how to do it. And if you don't give me the money, you're going to go to a desert for the rest of time after you die. And if I can convince you, I can just sit there easily and collect the money. As a matter of fact, I'm doing you a favor to collect the money and make sure that you go to heaven. This is using psychology to the extreme. So without using any force, I'm convincing you that I'm doing something for you and direct you the way that I want. It could be about money, If it's not money, it could be about the direction of politics that I want to direct you that way. And there are many different ways that today we talk about psychology, we talk about mostly inner child, that how our behavior is controlled by that little child. And I have to explain that. Then we talk about the politics of the world in the recent years and the interaction between psychology, the inner child, control, religion, politics, to show who we are today. You know, politics, the way I think about it, is like a game of chess. Most people know a couple of moves ahead of time, but only the masters know all the moves. They know where it goes. These are the masters, these are the chess players. Unfortunately, in my opinion nowadays, American administration is not a good chess player. I think that the religious group in Iran, they are very good chess players. And a lot of people don't know or didn't know what was going on. Since the Second World War, there were two critical times in history of the United States and the world that the world faced a serious problem. The first one was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. At that time at the administration, John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and their advisor, Kenneth O'Donnell, three of them, they knew what they were doing, and they were calling them doves, peaceful doves, against the generals that they were hawkish, they were like hawks, that they wanted to start a war. If you have not watched the movie 13 Days, watch that movie. You realize that how the world came to the brink of the Third World War and how they resolved it. They could take care of the crisis. The second crisis in the world was 9/11. Again, in my opinion, unfortunately, the administration between President George Bush, Vice President Dick Cheney, and Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, they were hawkish themselves. They didn't know that the rules of the game has changed after 9/11, and they were following certain ideas. They didn't know what they were dealing with. It's interesting to know that even right before attacking Iraq, they didn't know anything about Sunnis and Shiites, and they didn't know the difference. So basically, we are dealing with how much people know about what they are doing. Is this something that as good chess players, do they know what they were getting into? I don't think so. Do I think that at the time of Kennedy, they knew what they were doing? Yes, they knew what they were doing. And the outcomes were very different, and now we see that we are standing at a time that, unfortunately, there would be a possibility of Third World War. The question is that, why? Why are we facing this situation? Why is that we face this world that there is so much tension? The Islamic countries, the Western countries, what's happening? How is that thousands of people voluntarily go and register to become suicide bombers? It's unheard of. Why does it happen? Good portion of this is because of psychology. Then I have to probably give a crash course in psychology in a few minutes. And I know that I have about 50 minutes. This is a talk that probably would take 5 hours, so I just have to go through it. You know about the concept of the inner child, and at the same time, what I have to tell you is that when we are born, we have no logic. You see, the children, they have magical thinking, what we call it surrealistic things children have. You can go through the wall, Bugs Bunny can walk on the air, there's no gravity, and falls on the earth, into 5 pieces, goes back, and walks again. And all the things that you see in terms of the magical thinking of the children, the kettle talks, get to a point that gradually the 3-dimensional world that we have, the logic of this world is forced upon us layer by layer. I drop things so many times that they only go downward because of gravity, they don't go up. I cannot go through the wall. And it's very interesting that later on, when we do things like that, like Salvador Dali, that has all these surrealistic paintings, he's appreciated, and his art is appreciated because of all the emotions. So gradually, we have layers of logic, but still the core part of us remain that inner child. The part that we use as adults, what I refer to adults or the logical part, is the one who just goes with social contracts. The pure logic is when we do math, when we do algebra. I don't care what the result is, if it's 2 or 3. But as soon as I go to see the test and I'm worried about the result of my test, I get nervous, emotions would get involved, and maybe that little boy who was always scared of the test, I blank out, I cannot do it. So my function gets very different. And then, when it gets to issues like close relationships, love, supernatural thinking, most of it is the way that I was programmed since childhood, or a good portion of this goes with the inner child. It's interesting that we see as adults, we go and watch a magician. We see David Copperfield is like cutting a woman in half. Like, what does that mean? If someone looks at this as an adult, and a lot of people do, and says, this is boring, it's an illusion, they don't go there. But some people go there, get excited. It's because that little child gets excited with the security of the adult next to it. So, okay, get excited, but this is not real. Otherwise, if you cut someone in front of a child, it would be traumatized. We see a lot of things that we do as grown-ups that is still under the effect. People go and watch the movie Star Wars. The person who made it, everyone knows it's science fiction, that it's not true. The producer becomes a multimillionaire, everyone else goes and pays $10 and they enjoy it. Some people even wear the costumes and they play as if it's real. But the moment you believe in it, they say you're psychotic and you need treatment. On a general level, you know that a lot of times, even in Iran, they were saying when there was a solar eclipse, they were saying that the dragon is eating it. A lot of people believe that. As a matter of fact, there was a documentary movie on Arts and Entertainment showing that the Cambodian army shooting at the sun, at the dragon, and they were saying that by the end of the solar eclipse, nothing happened to the dragon, 70 people got injured on the ground. Why do we do that? Even in Iran, people had pots and pans and banged it, and always the dragon got scared and ran away. So what I'm saying is that our lives is a combination and the connection and the relationship between the adult and that child. We see Heaven's Gate. If you remember a few years ago, even close to San Diego, some people, a cult, they kill themselves believing that by dying they're going to go to the spaceship and then they're going to go somewhere else. These people were not psychotic. These people were suggestible. The suggestion is the inner child. People can be controlled. Masses could be moved through the inner child, not through the adult. If the best philosopher of the world, someone like Bertrand Russell, with all his knowledge, he could not move people to just go and kill themselves because it deals with the adult. But a religious person, doesn't matter what religion, more so we're talking about the Islamic suicide bombers, you can see that waves of people and children go and walk on landmines. How? It's because it's the child. So in all of us, it depends on the relationship that we have between the adult and the child. This affects everything, from day-to-day work, from relationship, from marriage, to politics. This is the relationship. And it's very interesting. If you look at even the primitive tribes, always the power of the medicine man or the shaman is more than the chief. Because the chief represents the adult administrative logical part, and the medicine man or shaman represents the inner child magical thinking and supernatural. And they always have more power. So this is something that we need to know in terms of some of the basic things in terms of the inner child. Then we get throughout the history, we get to a period of time that we see that the knowledge of the human being was not a lot before, but when we get to the point of changes, revolutions that comes, a renaissance in Europe, and the knowledge gets to a point that the knowledge surpasses the thinking of the little child. What I mean is that there was a time that really people thought that a cockroach comes from paper. They didn't know biology, they didn't know DNA, and they believed that. Or if you have plague, is the wrath of God. And everyone knows the story about Galileo, says that Earth goes around the sun, and they say, no way, because the Bible said otherwise, and, he didn't want to die, so he said, I'm sorry, you're right. But what happened is that they could not stop the progress of science. And science took off, the adult part grew, and then there was a separation through revolts, revolutions, cultural changes. In Europe, it got to a point that, as a matter of fact, when they talk about separation of church and state, it's not exactly that way. It's because the kings got enough power to push the church's control away and get the state out of the control of the church. Still, if you leave religions alone, there are the radical parts that would take over the state also. The reason I say that there has not been a definite change is because even in the United States, when you talk about state versus change and the separation, people who go to Congress, they have the Bible, they swear on the Bible. Dollar bill, in God we trust. So there is not a real change, a separation, but they have been able with power and force and understanding and cultural growth to separate them. Then we look at what is wrong. Like, okay, that was a system that worked for thousands of years, and now we have a system that works for a couple of hundred years. What is the difference? All systems in people's life, doesn't matter how much knowledge we have, we try to come up with some explanations. I give you a very good example. Someone gets sick. Compare two systems. The scientific system today, right, wrong, and also the old system, which was more of a belief system. Someone gets sick. What do we say right now? Okay, it's the bacteria. Go to the lab, do a blood test, get antibiotic, and get rid of it. What was the belief before? Evil eye. Now, how do you, instead of lab, what do? You break eggs, you write names on the egg and you push it to see that whose name was there. And then what you do is that you get some saliva or some dust of the person's soul and you rub it against your skin. What is preventive medicine? You wash your hands and you watch for infection There, people use sharp objects and salt and killing the evil eye. So this is basically two different systems. They both try to answer the questions, totally different. The point is that Renaissance did not spread everywhere. It was only some parts of the Europe, and then it was transferred to America, but not Middle East or other areas of the world. People go through this with political maturity. They go through these things and they think that like if a group has become democratic, they can transfer it or they can inject it into another society. It doesn't happen that way. People have to go through changes. People have to go through the growth to get to that point. Why do we have religion? We need something to lean on. That inner child is very interesting. That by itself has a huge discussion by itself, that when we grow up, the way we relate to authority figure, which is mostly the father, we think that the father is immortal. Then we get to a certain age, we realize that the father is mortal, that the father could die, that a father does not have the ultimate power. And about that time, we start having the concept of God. So we transfer our relationship to our father to God. A lot of times you see that there is a parallel between the adult relating to God and the little child relating to his or her father at that time. We need that. We need to lean on something. The more someone can have independence and reliance, the less they depend on religion. Also, the religion has two parts. One is that if you have religion for the adult person, it's spirituality. It's the relationship of the human being with God and with the world through spirituality, but for the masses is a ritual. If you're dealing with religion for the child, is rituals. You do this, there is a magical power of doing this. When you want to go away, you go under the holy book, and it protects you. Whatever that we do, giving that magical power to certain behavior. When people get married or they want to have a surgery, they go and kill an animal, that maybe the evil would go away. So we do a lot of things in our behavior that relates to the magical thinking. It's interesting to know that spirituality frees people. People are free through spirituality. Through rituals, they are controlled. It depends on how much we want to be controlled or someone else wants to control us, that tells us how much we need to be controlled by religion. But what happens is that, like a family, we needed a father, we needed the direction. What Renaissance did and what the science did, in a way, took the father away, or some people say that it killed God or it killed the father. So in a way, people became orphans. Some people were ready psychologically and through maturity to govern themselves. Some people were not. And because of that, we have had a lot of chaos. Some people say that our society needs that. Our society needs religion. Our society needs God, because if God didn't exist, we had to create God because of our own need. Today, clashes that we see between all different groups is basically a clash between the adult and the inner child. The adult is represented by the Western civilization, and the inner child by religions. The problem with Renaissance was that because we wanted to act like adult people, we had to carry all the burden of pressures So if God is not there, any problem is my problem, and I have to solve it somehow. I cannot depend on my father. If something goes wrong, okay, daddy is going to take care of it. God is going to take care of it. He gave me a book, I follow it, I'm a good boy, and he will take care of it. But if I'm a grown-up, I have to come up with some answers. Okay? A lot of answers we can give. Today, a lot of other answers, we are not able to give those answers. What happened is that after Renaissance, materialism got to a point that it was ridiculous, to the point that human beings turned into a bunch of oxygen, hydrogen, carbons, and all these things. Not paying attention to spirituality, the need of people, issues with inner child, psychological issues of people, and that got to a point that we realized that after that, we had communism based on materialism and everything else that happened at that time. So that was a problem with the Renaissance, because we had to accept all the problem, and because of that, we have more stress and more neurosis. You can see they say, like, you know, these religious people, they're so calm, they're so relaxed. It's because the Father is there to take care of them, and they don't have to carry all the pressures. The difference between religion, morality, and civil codes of the society is that with all other differences, there's something very interesting about it. Through religion and morality, we have the internal police. With civil codes and the society, we have the outside police. What do I mean? In civil codes, they say, if you steal, if you're caught by the police, if they take you to court, if you're convicted, you may go to jail. Religion and morality says, thou shalt not steal. And if you do, you're going to be burned in hell. Or daddy is going to take care of you. So when you have that internal thing, it's more preventive, and you have the police in you. You don't need to have the police outside. I always say, if societies believe in whatever they believe, it shows their internalization of the culture. Consider in one day, if in New York, in Paris, and a tribe in Africa, there is no police force, of course there would be law breaking. But maybe in New York there would be a lot more crime than in an African tribe, because people do believe in those values, and the police is within them. They don't do a lot of things. Now, controlling them sometimes could be good, sometimes could be bad. It all depends on how someone wants to direct them. One of the problems that people have because of their dependence in religion is that they think that a rabbi, a priest, or a mullah is a prophet. They don't understand. A prophet is a representative of God. Okay, right, wrong, whatever it is. It's on a different level. But someone who just goes and reads books and interprets the books is like if you go to law school. It does not give you any sort of supernatural power, and it does not make you representative of them. And it's very interesting. I can give you the analogy that it's like a bunch of people are together, and the father is dead, or the father is not there, like God, and one person says, the father is dead, I am the only person who can read his will, and I tell you what he wanted you to do. Nobody else can read it, only I can read it, and I can tell you what it is. So, doesn't matter what religion, this is the way that when it becomes into rituals and mind control rather than spirituality, it happens. Now, where does all these clashes come from? All these things that we have had in the recent years. Always there have been some radical religious groups in the world, but usually they were in minority, the moderates had more power, people were not scared of them, and the world situation was different. Now, I have to switch to a little history about what happened in the Islamic world. In Egypt, 1929, I believe, that the Muslim Brothers, or Ikhwan Muslimin, they started someone by the name of Hassan Banna, started that, which reflected all the radical Islamic things that they wanted to live the same way at the time of the Prophet, and they were against all the scientific things. And they said, we want to have a society and a country that operates that way, based on Islamic laws. There was someone, the name is known, Said Qutb. This is in 1948, which he was against Malik Farouk, and at that time, after the war with Israel in 1948 and the embarrassments of the war, and he was writing against him, they wanted to arrest him, and he fled to the United States. And he dressed like other Westerners. And the interesting thing is that his friends hoped that he would come here and become more modernized. But when he came to the United States, he was very upset with what he saw in terms of the freedom, in terms of women, in terms of, to him, chaos in the society, and said that these people worship money. And in 1952, I believe, he went back to Egypt after Hassan al-Banna was killed, because at that time the Muslim Brothers started a branch of military and they started killing people, so the Egyptians killed him. But at that time he became more religious and believed more in what Muslim Brothers believed, and he went back to Egypt. There is something very important that what happened at that time. In 1948 or 49, Billy Graham, that today we know him as the spiritual father of the United States and an evangelist, he gave a speech. In his speech he said that either Christianity lives or communism lives. If Christianity lives, communism cannot live. If communism lives, Christianity cannot survive. Said Qutb at that time writes something and mentions something that would not be the case, because Christianity deals with the spirituality, does not deal with day-to-day life and laws. And two, capitalism and communism are both materialistic. There would be a day that Islam is going to face both of them. This is almost 60 years ago. So you can see that if you looked at the history at that time, he predicted about 60 years ago what is happening today. The only difference is that things were not ready at that time. He goes back, this is about the time that Abdel Nasser and the other officers wanted to make a coup, and there was some allegiance between them, and then there's a coup, Malik Farouk goes, Abdel Nasser becomes the president with a difference. Abdel Nasser was pan-Arabist and wanted to modernize the Arab world. Said Qutb and Muslim Brothers went pan-Islamist, and they wanted to go backwards. So that became a problem. He started doing things against the government, and then he was arrested, he was killed, and they thought that that would be over. That was not the case. It's interesting, one of the students who happened to be Ayman al-Zawahiri at that time followed the ideas, and after a lot of different things, he goes to Saudi Arabia after he's arrested for the killing of Anwar Sadat, which was also one of the cells of the Muslim Brothers, and meets Osama bin Laden with a different story. And then we see around the same time in Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini with the same ideas in 1962, that he started a revolt and all these things with the same sort of ideas. Then he was exiled, he comes back. But the interesting part is that after the Second World War and the Cold War between United States, Western countries, and the Soviet Union at the time, Soviet Union usually went behind masses. Either mind control, right, wrong, whatever, went behind masses. United States made alliance with either generals or corrupt governments. And after a while, realized that they were toppled. Easily, the general was killed, the corrupt regime was changed to something else, and there are movements of communism. What they did, they changed their policy to getting into masses. How would they do that? Religion. So what they did, they used Christianity in Europe and mostly Latin America. And as someone says, they replaced Jesus, whatever Sayyid Qutb said 60 years ago. Christianity did this job and it stopped that, but Islam continued, and the next target is capitalism in Western countries. And it's very interesting that when you think about it, how these things did happen. Around 1978, you have Poland, there is unrest in Poland, then you have Solidarity, then you have Lech Walesa, and then there is turmoil, then after that you have a Pope, John Paul II, for the first time in history, a Polish Pope, very charming, and he takes over and takes care of all the Christian countries and become more powerful and against communism. And on this side, around 1978, we see unrest in Iran, and then we have different political groups together, and they are fighting and all these things, and all of a sudden it becomes religious. And Khomeini and religious people would take over. And what happens, that area becomes religious. But as soon as they saw that it's expanding, they had to implode the power. What do? The war between Iran and Iraq. But after a while, the war is over, the second wave started. And then we have people like bin Laden and all these people, continuation of that way of thinking, a Muslim Brotherhood or their philosophy, and that kind of thinking. We see that how it affects the world, and we say, how come they could do this sort of things? They couldn't do it at a different time. But when you have a revolution, Islamic revolution in Iran, a country which is behind you, when you have the war in Afghanistan, you have the evil Soviets then, when you have the Mujahideen, and when bin Laden goes there, and when you have all the money that bin Laden has, and all the philosophy of the Wahhabi Muslim in Saudi Arabia, and when you have the ignorance of Western countries. You put them all together, that's what we're dealing with. And what we're dealing with right now is not something that would go over or is going to finish soon. A lot of people say that this could be some sort of crusade, which is going to take a long time because this is the war between two philosophies and it's not just one country fighting against another country. I don't know how much time I have, but I have to talk very quickly. How much time do I have? 8 more minutes. Okay. I need to talk to you also very quickly about psychology and terrorism. And with all the things we talked about, the inner child and all those things, I want you to pay attention to this. When a small group is fighting a large group, there is no way that they could do classical war. So what they do is terrorism, meaning terror would paralyze the enemy. You cannot kill all of them, but you can paralyze them. We know the history of terrorism. Hassan al-Sabbah in Iran, Omar Khayyam, Khaja Nizam al-Mulk, there is myth or truth, but that's the history that goes, and if you remember the Alamut and hashish and mind control, and he tells one of his followers to jump off the cliff and says, this is power. So what we have is that terrorism by itself is when a small group fights a large group. And this is with Hassan Sabbah. And it's very interesting that when you go with the roots of all the words, like assassin, hashish, and all these things, you see that a lot of information is embedded in the words. Then there's another stage. Martyrdom. We all know that it started basically for us with Imam Reza. And why is that? Oh, what am I talking about? Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein, I'm sorry. That why is he so respected and well loved? The reason is that he knew he would die, but he stood up for his belief. And he gave up his life for his belief in a small number of people in a classical war. So that's martyrdom started with that. Later on, someone came up and combined the two, meaning that you're willing to give up your life for your belief in a terroristic way. All the terrorist organizations in Europe, and more than anything else, if you remember in history, the kamikaze flights of Japanese pilots, it was more of a terrorist act that they would go and hit the American ships, and they knew they would kill themselves, but for a higher belief, whatever that they believed in. But these sort of things takes a lot of determination, needs a lot of discipline, and it would be very difficult, and only a few people could do something like that. Then someone else joined and came up with a better idea. The adult suicide bomber, you give that to the inner child. Now it's the child who becomes the suicide bomber. How? If you do that, God is going to be very happy with you. You kill God's enemies. You are a hero. Your family would be proud of you. They may get some money. And then, you know there's no pain when it's such a sudden explosion. You go to the other world. They give you a beautiful house, 72 beautiful women, ever virgins, and you're going to be there. And the interesting thing is that this promise is not given to a 70-year-old man. It's given to a 16 or 18-year-old boy, full of hormones. And this is something that you see is the child who was manipulated, the inner child in the adults, who would fall for it, who would believe it. The same way that we see a lot of people had the pots and pans banging for the dragon to go away, and they were successful. So it's the same mentality, the same way, and we all, in a lot of things that we do every day, we have that inner child. So this sort of new terrorism is the inner child who has become a suicide bomber, and that's why when they register for them, thousands of people line up to become suicide bombers, and people say, my God, I don't know why. How is it possible for all these people to go voluntarily and line up in thousands, not in 10 or 20s, to become a suicide bomber? That's the reason. That's the way that it happens. And you can see that how difficult it is to fight with something like that, how much educated people need to work. That doesn't matter how much as adults you tell them the things that they learned during their childhood play such an important role. All those little kids that you see in those madrasas in Pakistan and other places would be extremely difficult if you can change their way of mentality. And worse than that, they're going to raise the next generation. So just imagine that what we are dealing with. And if you remember, in the Farsi books that we had in the school, there was always the story of someone goes to the village and says, how do you spell the snake? Was it the mar, mim, aleph, re, or is the shape of the snake? Both of them are acceptable, but they are very different. It's very important to know that the manipulations and mind control that we are facing in all aspects of our lives, and this is just one part that I talked about, in everything that we do, from the media that we are controlled from, the food that we eat, from the type of relationships that we have, from day-to-day life that we have, we live at a time that there is mind control. And there are different ways of mind control. And at least it's better to know it and realize that how difficult it is to change it and what a big responsibility we have to educate the next generation. And it's not just us, it's the next generation. Thank you. Yes, please. No. Right. As a matter of fact, I did mention about that. That was before this sort of suicide bombers. I told you that the adult is a suicide bomber, which was the kamikaze pilots, that the European terrorism, but there is a philosophy behind it, but that person has to be very much motivated, dedicated, and disciplined to do that. You cannot have that in masses. But you have those people, I agree with you, there are many different reasons for it, but when we talk about the masses and such high numbers, and when those promises are given, we need to take what I said into consideration, knowing that, yes, there are a lot of other terrorist groups that they would do that with what you mentioned. Yes, please. Right. How many times have you seen educated people who are superstitious? How many times, doesn't matter how many years you went to college, you see someone sneezes and they stop, sabrumat? How many times we do things that when we think about it, doesn't make sense? Again, we go back between the relationship between the adult and the child, and the connection and disconnection. This would be the same way that I told you about Heaven's Gate. These people were not psychotic. These people had jobs. They did a lot of different things. But they had that belief. What I'm telling you, that there is a split. If in human growth, psychological growth, there is no transition and connection between the adult and the child, we see those kind of things. Personally, I know a lot of educated people who are very superstitious. Very, very much. And then I told you, why do we watch Star Wars? The adult says this is science fiction, but you can enjoy yourself. How do we see David Copperfield cutting a woman in half? The child gets excited, the adult knows it's an illusion, the child enjoys it with the security of the adult. because they are together. Otherwise, if we have a split in other areas, you can see someone could be very educated, but then they do things that are superstitious, and superstition by itself or rituals are to lower our anxiety. Like for instance, I don't know his name, there is a known baseball player that every time he goes to play a game, he has to eat chicken first. Is it rational to us? No. It calms him down. What do you think happens in different religions with the rituals that they have to lower the anxiety? As a matter of fact, there is something between religions, the school of thoughts, and psychology and psychiatry. They are all trying to help human beings to have comfort, to deal with their conflicts, to deal with their anxiety, to deal with the stress, to deal with issues like life, death. We don't know these things. Not everyone has the time or the education or the devotion to go and study about these things. Masses, when they go and they work and they come home, if they make enough money to find enough food to eat, when something happens, they cannot sit there every day and come up with answers. It's much easier to say, Daddy knows, God knows. I would depend on God. Okay, I cannot see the God. Okay, so this holy man represents him. I do whatever that he says, and I give my trust in him. Now, if he misuses that trust, it's something else. People do need to have something or someone to rely on. Yes, please.
First, thank you for your thought. I have a few questions for you that I hope help explain. Thank you for the speeches, but also I have three questions or issues with the speech, which I think it's good to explore one side of it, which is the religion, but as our young friend stated about one of it, which is the power. The other part of it is the economy, which is also part of the power.
Sure.
The underdog versus the winner of all, and also the level of the growth. The level of the growth, I take issue with your comparing Poland to Iran. Totally different societies. I don't think what happened in Poland, the way the direction it went was because of the Poland Christianity. I think it had more to do with the level of growth of the society of Poland versus Iran. And same thing with the comparing the West to the adult and the religion, which most of you talk about Islam to the tribe. The West, as we can see in this country, there's still almost very close to a majority that are still against abortion, 40-60. Okay, this is the West, but it's also religious. Okay, so I don't see West as non-religious and East or Islam as the religious because of all the issues. So when you ignore the society and the level of the power and the economy and the growth of the society, I think you fall into a conclusion of Islam develops terrorism. We're part of Eastern war, so we are the bad guys. West, as you stated, West is the evil. I totally disagree with that.
Okay, as a matter of fact, I do agree with you. The point is that this topic, because we don't have enough time and it was a very broad discussion, one of the problems is that they did not have the topic of the discussion. This topic was narrowed on this. Otherwise, I definitely agree with you, because the West, Christianity is stronger today. And we have a lot of radical Christian groups. We have a lot of radical Jewish groups that they would do exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. I did not compare Poland to Iran in terms of the whatever that was going on, because they were totally two different societies. I was talking about how they moved a movement in a way that they wanted to have that. Two different countries, two different cultures, two different dynamics, not comparable, but the end result that they wanted to have someone control it was more. In terms of Christianity versus Islam or Judaism, when it becomes fundamental, they're all the same. The other thing is that I did not talk about the religion itself. And if you paid attention, I did not criticize religion, and I did talk about the spirituality side of religion, all religions. And it's the adult part that relates. Now there is another part to talk about the West. I never said that the West is correct. The conflict that there is. And yes, the West does not just by itself symbolizes those adults that we're talking about, but it has also its own issues. As a matter of fact, I should just mention something, and I think that it would be worth going over this, and this has nothing to do with any specific religion, but it has to do with the move against Renaissance. With all religions, or even if not religion, that way of thinking. The wave against Renaissance would be magic versus logic, belief versus science, inner child versus adult, dependence versus independence, control versus freedom, ritual and superstitious thinking versus spirituality, governed by a few people under the name of God versus governed by people for people. Okay? So this has nothing to do with Islam. This is to do with the way of thinking that we can see it in all areas, in all religions, and we face that. And besides that, when I told you about the issue with Mar, how to write it or how to draw it, a lot of people say that the correct way is the drawing of the snake, because you see it, you recognize it. We're just going with the symbolic part of spelling it. Yes, please. No. Right. No, right. Oh. No, let me, don't, excuse me. We are not making a dialogue there. Okay? Now, the point is that every group, somehow they justify whatever they want to do. The groups, if you pay attention, I did not talk about the cause. I was not talking about the cause at all, because sometimes the cause could be correct, sometimes could be incorrect. One of the things with mind control, if you read a book about destructive cults by Stephen Hassan, we know that there are about more than 3,000 different cults in the United States. And with the definition of a cult and mind control, it's not just David Kurosh. Even in military they have it, even in religion they have it, even in psychology they have it. So what you're talking about is what I mentioned at the end. We are all bombarded with information. The cause would be different. I didn't talk about the cause. Yes, they could be correct, just, or not just. As a matter of fact, people who went to Second World War because they thought that the war was just, they did not have as many psychological problems as when people went to war in Vietnam or in Iraq. So the reason for it is something outside our discussion. But I agree with you. Some of them are, they have good reason, some of them may not. Mostly the person who directs masses knows what he or she wants to do. The same way that you may have mind control to sell a product or start a war or send innocent soldiers to war and get killed. And they don't have any control over it because they're in military. They tell go, they have to go. So what I was talking about was the dynamics of psychology of behavior. I was not talking about if an action is just or not just. Please. Right. Okay, couple of different ones. Sure, please. Of course. Sure. Sure. Okay. If you pay attention, I didn't put all of them in one group. I went from Hassan Sabbah, then I went to martyrdom, then I went to a lot of terrorist groups in Europe that has nothing to do with the inner child. That has nothing to do. I had them on 3 different categories. The last one was the one that deals with the inner child. The other, like the pilots, as I told you, it was not inner child, it was the dedication and devotion to Japan and the emperor. And they went and they killed themselves. Had nothing to do with the inner child. Or with Hassan Sabbah, that had nothing to do with the inner child. It was just the technique that they used, the tactic that they used, and it was effective for them. So I don't believe that is all inner child. What I was trying to tell you, and I explained, I went through different categories. But because of the psychological part, and I had explained the inner child before, maybe you felt that I was only focusing on that. But that's only one part. Please. Right. It's killing innocent people. Okay, you see, always, when people want to do something that psychologically is very difficult to do, they try to justify it somehow. When Germans wanted to attack the other countries, they said that they are subhumans. When you see that they try to kill someone, a fire squad, they blindfold them. They say, oh, because the person is not going to be scared. No, because that person who wants to shoot has to feel different. Oh, because no. Okay. Because this is a classical war. They don't need to terrorize. They just go and kill them. They just go. Of course, unfortunately, well, it is. You see, it's not a matter of right or wrong, good or bad. It's a matter of different techniques. Now, what they do is that you may say, on a larger scale, is terrorism because they attack one country so other countries would know what they are doing. But unfortunately, they made a grave mistake. Right. Well, let me tell you something. When I was watching television, when Donald Rumsfeld was saying, "Oh, this would be shock and awe," and you could see this is like 4th of July, like, fire thing. There were innocent human beings down there. I always remember that, the bombs that they had, they threw a bomb that was 8,000 pounds to kill Saddam when it was in a commercial district, and the hole that it made, it was like 2 stories. These are innocent people. They were not bombarding deserts of Afghanistan. They were innocent people. There were innocent people there. Of course. Where do you think that people get their information? We all get information either passively through the media, or we just try to go and study. And even when we study, what do we study? The resources that are available to us. The mind control is something that we are all affected by it. Even I am, you are, everyone is. It's just the amount of the mind control. What we're dealing with is when we face something that's so drastic, is very clear-cut. When we are controlled by the media and see things that we want to see, that's mind control. Even to the point that if I have 1 car, I think that I have 2 cars because my neighbor has 2 cars. That's mind control. The way that the society is, we can see that because we came from a different society here, and we got involved with it, that today I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago because I got more involved with this. 2 different systems. As immigrants, we can see the difference more. But if you're born somewhere far from all those things and you get all this information, what do you think? We're all affected by it. Some people more, some people less. We just hope to see more. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Dr. Ali Akbari. He's a professor of economics with broad experience in research design and methodology. He has been active professionally, publishing articles, presenting papers, and serving on professional programs and consulting. He has published 2 textbooks in economics, Exploration in Macroeconomics and Economic Way of Thinking. Dr. Akbari is an articulate urban economist with more than 2 decades of teaching and research experience. He is currently a professor of economics at California Lutheran University. He has been teaching at other universities such as Pepperdine and University of Southern California. Dr. Akbari is the director of the Center for Economic Research at California Lutheran University. His latest project was the development of an economic and business forecasting model that provides quarterly forecast of economic activities in the major cities of Ventura County. As an experienced researcher, he has participated in various research projects on national and local levels. His specialized areas of teaching and research include urban and regional economics, research methods, public opinion and consumer surveys, image evaluation, consumer satisfaction studies, community needs assessment, social impact studies, tracking studies, and housing and transportation analysis. As a senior researcher for several projects sponsored by the National Science Foundation, he has published many research papers for NSF. His latest book chapter, Diversity in Information Technology Education, Issues and Controversies, was published in 2006. He's a member of the American Economic Association and Western Economic Association. Please welcome Dr. Akbari.
Thank you very much for such a nice introduction and kind remarks. Such a small group of audience, I would prefer not to use the formal podium and have my presentation in much more informal and friendly manner. What I would like to present today is the status of several economic problems in the world and try to identify certain trends that has shaped the global economy and identify various potentials for developing countries to be aware of certain potentials. Specifically, I'm going to talk about a major problem called digital divide that may prevent many countries to access information and benefit from all the powers of information technology and communication technology that leads the world into a new era called information age society. So if you permit me, I would like to leave the podium and use my PowerPoint presentation along with several programs that I would like to use to portray data. I am very much aware that social and economic data could be kind of boring for audience. So what I have done, rather than repeating a bunch of numbers, I have created some demonstration, graphic demonstration of the data to tell you where we are, the world economy, the changes that has occurred recently, and the changes that will occur in the next 30 years. The history of mankind has seen three major revolutions, three major changes that has affected the basic fabric of social relationship. About 7,000 years ago, humanity went through a change called agricultural revolution. In 7,000 years ago, the mode of productions changed when societies decided to use a new method of production to give a predominant role to existence of natural resources. Whichever country had more natural resources, minerals, oils, fertile land, water, they could have progressed better. In mid-1800, there was the second major revolution that changed the basic social pattern and the basic social relationship in the world. It's called Industrial Revolution. You and I are alive in a period of time, a transitional period of time into a new age. We are witnessing a new revolution. It's called information revolution, and the society that has been created called information age. Many countries have already entered the new age, and many countries are way behind it, and the phenomena that is called digital divide, which is a major stumbling block for the future development of certain countries. So again, because of a small audience size, I would rather go near my PC and show you certain data, and specifically I'm going to take advantage of some graphical device to portray some numbers that shows the changes that has occurred in the last 100 years, specifically the changes that has occurred since 2000. So we would be aware of four trends. The trends, major trends that would change the way we live, whether we are aware of it or unaware of it, are liberalization process, which started in 1900, digital economy, information age society, or what we call it knowledge-based economy, And the last trend that I'm going to be talking about, the digital divide phenomena and how it could affect the future of Iran, how it could affect the future of many countries. So with your permission, I am going to use my high-pitched voice and basically sit among you and show you certain numbers, and I'm going to be doing my best not to bore you with data, to give you the zest of the idea. The basic idea that I like to present here is that the world is changing. The world is changing so fast, and it is changing in every dimension. Those who are aware of these new trends could take advantage of these trends and could control the world. And those who are not aware of it, just at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, those who got the benefit of the Industrial Revolution, they were able to change the standard of living of the people. Last century, in 1900, there was not even one country on the planet Earth that could have been called a true democracy. I would like to introduce an important book written by Fareed Zakaria. Fareed Zakaria is a very famous, internationally renowned writer, and he is the editor-in-chief of Newsweek magazine. He wrote a bestseller in 2004 called Future of Democracy. In his book, with all the data, he starts explaining what happened in 20th century and how these changes had shaped the societies. As I told you at the beginning of the century in 1900, there wasn't even one country on the planet Earth that would fit the definition of a true democracy. The true democracy is defined as a country in which all people, regardless of the gender, age, ethnicity, could participate in the election and elect representative government. Remember that even in the United States, 1924, women for the first time, they got the voting right, and minorities, they got it in the civil rights era. At the end of that century, 112 countries enjoyed the benefits of democracy. 63% of the countries on the planet Earth, they enjoy a truly representative government. So the winds of democracy that started at the beginning of the century, at the end of the century, really put its mark on the hallmark of the century. The century saw so many different advancements and developments. The century saw so many discoveries. The century saw so many wars. But if I want to use one phrase to describe 20th century, it is a century that democratization started, and the wind of democracy really blew. Many countries are taking advantage of it. I'm going to give you certain numbers from the day that people really participated freely in electing their democratic government, how their standard of living, how their per capita income rose, how the longevity changed, how the health changed, how poverty situation changed. In year 2000, more than 100 countries signed a treaty, later became known as Millennium Goals. There were 8 goals that these countries decided. They signed a treaty. They said, we are going to set a time period. The time period was 2015. There were 8 major goals that these countries wanted to eradicate extreme poverty. They wanted to control the AIDS and malaria situation. They wanted to control the child mortality situation. There were 8 major goals. I'm going to show you certain graphical tools that would show you where we are, different regions of the world and different countries of the world, whether or not we have attained those promised goals, and how far off different countries are from the Millennium Goals. And then we're going to be looking at another set of data in which I'm going to start in 1970 I'll show you two major indices. The first index is about longevity. How many years a person who is born today is expected to live. And you will be amazed at vast differences that exist in the world. We have countries such as Zimbabwe. A person that is born there today is expected to live 32 years. And we have Japan, that the same day a person is born is expected to live 82 years. Then the next dimension would be ability to live good, meaning per capita income, per person income. How much a typical resident of different countries are making and how much did they make. And I'm going to associate the changes, the positive changes, with the winds of democracy. I'm going to show you a positive correlation between democratization of a country and a movement toward digital economy and increase in the standard of living. How the life changed for 15 countries who were able to take advantage of these trends. So again, allow me to show you certain data, and I'm gonna try my best to talk in high-pitched voice. I do not know how you're gonna tape it because I'll be sitting there. Sorry. Economic change and economic development is no longer dependent on natural resources. Once upon a time, in an agricultural economy, as well as in the industrial era, the major determinant of the prosperity were natural resources, physical resources, how much capital the country holds. These days, there has been a tremendous change toward what we call a knowledge-based society, knowledge-based economy. Knowledge has now become the main driving force of the world economy. Today, there are 6.5 billion people inhabiting the planet Earth. And I'd like to present some data about how population has changed. In year 1000 AD, there were 310 million people, just exactly the same number of people, the same population size of the United States. 310 million people were living on the planet Earth. It took about 800 years for the population to get to 1 billion. In year 1800, it reached 1 billion. Let me now report to you how many years it took for the next 1 billion, how many years. So it took 800 years for the world to get to 1 billion people. Let me report to you how many years it took for the population to be doubled. In year 1928, the world got to 2 billion people. So it took about 126 years for the population of the world to be doubled. Now, from 1928 to 1961, that's only 33 years. In 33 years, there was another billion people added to the population of the world. From 1961 to 1974, that's only 13 years. Another billion people added to the planet Earth. And remember, when you're talking about people, you got to think about the food, shelter, clothing, you got to think about all the material needs, entertainment, and every other aspect of providing the needs of the human being. Here is the projection for 2050. The world is going to get to 9.5 billion people by 2050. By that time, there will be 80% reduction in fossil fuel resources. It would be the end of cheap oil. These are all the predictions by internationally renowned researchers. These are the best forecasts that I have gathered here. There will be 45% reduction in the rainforest. Life expectancy in the United States, 79 years, is going to get close to 100 years. Urban population will be more than 60% globally. There will be a reduction of the people who are living in rural area and producing the food. At the beginning of 20th century, more than half of the population of the United States were farmers. Guess what's the percentage of that? 2%. Only 2% of the population in the United States are capable of producing so much food that would eradicate hunger on the planet Earth. It is due to change in technology, and I'm going to be talking about those 4 leading technologies that are going to shape the future of the world. Here are those, the magical science that will change the future of the humanity. For students who are ages, from the 100,000 years ago, from the Homo sapien age to today, humanity has gone through many spirals. Specifically, I would like to talk about industrial age. At industrial age, there was a major shift in the mode of production. Thank you very much, appreciate it. Yeah, that's better. Mode of production change, and it affected every social relationship on the planet Earth. My point today is that we are at the beginning of a new era. We are entering at the new age called information age that is going to surpass the potentials of industrial age. I would like to read you a couple of quotations about the major problem that will deprive the developing world to reap the benefit, the fruit of the science and technology. The revolution in IT, information and communication technology, offers genuine potential, but also raises the risk that the significant portion of the world would lose out. We need to promote policies and develop institutions that would let everybody benefit, and it won't happen on its own. We need planning. There are many countries, and I'm going to talk about Turkey, I'm going to talk about India, I'm going to talk about Brazil, I'm going to talk about China. They have a national policy that they are very much aware of the power of IT, information technology, communication technology, biotechnology, nanotechnology, and how they are directing their national resources toward attainment of these goals. Today, nearly 90% of all internet users are in industrialized countries, with the United States and Canada alone accounting for about 57% of all internet use on the planet Earth. Income is an important determinant of PC penetration and access. There are many gaps. There is a gender gap, income gap, ethnicity gap, and these gaps is going to threaten the future development of many countries. Low-level income group, like women, individuals with less schooling, rural communities, and ethnic minorities are all less likely to have access to information communication technology. That means they have less chance of getting a better job, job mobility. They have less chance of basically attaining a higher standard of living. It's going to have an echo. I thank you, appreciate it. Even in developed countries such as Japan, men access to internet from home is about twice the rate of, this is what we call the gender gap, the gender divide that is going to threaten a segment of the population. And again, the world and policymakers have to be aware of it and come up with specific policies. 12% of the world population has access to internet. But about 676 million. Out of 676 million, only 12 million of them are in Africa. 175 million of them are in the United States. From 1996 to last year, total internet users have gone from, this is very interesting data, 36 million to 1 billion, or from 1% to 16% of the world population. In a minute, I'm going to show you how these data are highly correlated with quality of life, with their income, with health, with education, with every other aspect of life. From 1996 to 2006, US online retail e-commerce, perhaps the most useful proxy for the growth of virtual world economies, it has grown from 5 million to $95 billion. About 25% of the Asian commerce are done on internet. So imagine countries who are not ready for this revolution. They are going to be left behind. And imagine countries who are going to take advantage of these potentials. In 2004, internet penetration in China was still less than 6% of urban population. Yet, by that time, China already had the single largest population of online gamers. Each year, there is a magazine called Forbes magazine. Each year in March, they have an issue about the wealthiest people on the planet Earth, the club called Billionaires Club. The latest issue of Forbes shows that there are 976 billionaires on the planet Earth. Out of these, 176 of them are new billionaires, the people who became billionaire last year. Out of 176 people who became billionaires, more than half of them, they made their money somehow related to information communication technology. That's my point. Once upon a time, the wealth was generated by either the use of oil, agriculture, fertile land, accumulation of capital. Not anymore. Today we are living in a world in which human capital will play a significant role in comparison to physical capital. Let me give you an example. Here is the beauty of the new era, an era that Keynes, the, let's say, capitalist system cannot explain it, Marxist system cannot explain it. Once upon a time, the Marxist economists were analyzing that the value is created by accumulated labor. In other words, if I pay $1,000 for this laptop, that laptop is embodiment of the work by proletariat that is being exploited by the capitalist system. Marxist explanation of where value comes from. Now, capitalist point of view, either liberal, conservative, doesn't matter. The value comes from how much capital, physical assets are used. All those factories and production lines, real assets, physical assets. Okay. The change that has occurred in the paradigm, I give you just two numbers and you would realize the major change that has occurred in the world, and none of those theories can no longer explain it. Coca-Cola is a typical old company. It has about $55 billion assets. $55 billion. Out of $55 billion assets of Coca-Cola, $50 billion is physical assets. All those inventories and buildings and production lines and physical assets. 50 out of 55, physical. So you could say that, hey, value is created by capital. Let's compare it with Microsoft. Microsoft has about 56 billion, a comparable, the same as Coca-Cola. Out of $55 billion assets of Microsoft, only $5 billion is physical assets, or those factories and production line. $50 billion is human capital. All those engineers, all those young minds that every single day they are thinking about new invention, innovation, how to reduce the cost, how to produce a better program. So you can no longer say that this is exploitation of labor. You do not have the classical definition of labor in Microsoft anymore. The digital divide exists by country, by ethnicity, by race, by income, and in every level it could threaten the future of certain group of people. 3 years ago, I did a major research for National Science Foundation. We got a grant basically to explain a phenomena called digital divide. The digital divide in that program was gender divide. There was a study at UCLA that showed across the board, when you take a look at any college, you could see that women are presented more than men. For example, across UC system, 57% of students are female. But when it gets to IT, all of a sudden you see that the number drops to 7%. So definitely they will be kind of baffled, what is happening? Why do you see women are less likely to choose IT? Why African Americans, minorities, first generation college students are less likely to choose IT as their college major or future career? We spent about 2 years, and making a long story short, we basically were able to delete all those cliche explanations such as fear of mathematics. It wasn't fear of math. They are not ready. It wasn't that. Basically, it was the lack of role models. There were certain social impediments, the social problems that for a girl, it's less likely to choose because there was lack of a successful IT person in the family or the neighborhood, so they could imitate that success and they could say, hey, I can do it. It's the same for developing countries. I gotta go a little faster. There is work to be done to reduce the so-called digital divide between technology haves and have-nots. The newly formed dot forces is therefore an important step. I'm going to talk about certain programs in Turkey. I'm going to talk about certain programs in India and China that has worked. There is a program called One Laptop Per Child. The program was initiated about 4 years ago by some private companies in United States along with funding from UN. They are able to produce a laptop at the cost of $100. So far they have produced 10 million of them. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the newly elected guy in Turkey, has an important slogan. I want you to compare it with the slogan once we had in Iran by Hoveyda. Hoveyda was saying that I am hoping for a day that every Iranian could have a Paykan, one car. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and hey, let's face it, if everybody, every Iranian, 30 million at that time had one Paykan, where are you going to park it? Do we have the roads? Do we have the infrastructure? Do you think about environmental? And after all, what to do with it? He has changed the slogan, every child should have a laptop. 7 million of them so far last year were produced. There are certain trends that certain countries are taking advantage of it. The importance of it is that they are paving the future progress of their new generation. They are giving them better access to education. They are giving them better chance for job mobility, job advancement. Why is it important to close this gap, the digital divide? Because wide internet access means high income, means better potential for the new generation. Poor internet access, and when I talk about access, it's not just physical access to hardware. I'm talking about the skills and the knowledge to use internet, to be able to apply these technology to lower the cost, to come up with better product, innovate, and produce better product. This is a very important law. This law is going to revolutionize the future of anything produced by information technology. It's called Moore's Law. This is against every law that we know in economics. In economics, there are two basic laws. When you take Econ 101, the very first law that you hear is a scarcity, that economic resources are scarce, they are not abundant. The second law, which is comparable to, say, gravity law in physics, is that if you continue adding one factor of production, imagine you hire more labor or you add more capital, gradually it comes a point the last labor that you hire is going to contribute less than the previous person. It's called the law of diminishing marginal return. Now look at the information age. In the new era called information age, those two principles that every economist, they preached it and they worshiped it, is no longer working because we do not have a scarcity. We have abundance of knowledge. Gordon Moore was co-founder of Intel. He did a major study of the power of the processor, and he realized every 12 to 24 months, the power of processing increases twofold. What does it mean? That it means that, let's say, with the same cost. So Moore's law derives from two predictions. Computer chips, processors, memories, etc., they double their complexity every 12 to 24 years. This means every 15 years, on average, a large number of technological capabilities will grow. There will be new items that are cheaper. See, if you don't need any book to read about it, just think about 20 years ago, about almost any durable product that you purchase, from refrigerator to home to cars, the prices went up every single year. Inflation, it was adjusted by inflation. Here is the beginning of the new era, that the gadgets that you purchase next year are going to be better, they're going to be faster, they're going to be cheaper. The reason is that there is no scarcity of knowledge. There is no scarcity of invention and innovation. There are a couple of other, and I don't really want to go into the physics of it, there are a couple of other laws that guarantees the future belong. Here is the power, exponential power of computation of the chips. As you could see on the horizontal axis, 1900, go to year 2000, and you see how the increase in the potential of these microchips and processors has given you better gadgets, cheaper gadgets. There are some other laws, learning curve law, microcosmetic efficiency law. Together, all these laws means that future belongs to information, communication, technology. Here is the population projection in the future. To feed all these people, humanity has no choice but to pave the way by increasing the infrastructure, to improve the infrastructure for information technology, for communication technology, biotechnology, nanotechnology. This chart, it's very difficult to read, but I just want to make a point. Look, here is the income, the global income in the world. And as you could see from year 1000 to beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the rate of increase in income has been kind of increasing, but very steady increase. Look at what happened after the Industrial Revolution. Look, it is diagrammatic, it increased at an increasing rate. We are at the beginning of a new era, an era that let me give you a law, very easy law to analyze this type of data. It's called the law of 72, and it works perfectly. Imagine a phenomenon that is increasing at a constant rate of X%. Say that income, national income or per person income is increasing at 2%, which is the number for the United States. For the last 100 years, the average income of Americans has been increasing at 2% per year. The law of 72 says, have a numerator, 72, a denominator in that example is 2%. 72 divided by 2 gives you 36. It means that the income will be doubled every 36 years. It means in the United States, the income of the grandchildren, whoever will be born in 3 generations, will be 8 times more than their grandfather. And you could go on like that by just 2%. Imagine China from year 2000, the rate of growth of a typical Chinese has been 7.5%. What does that imply? It implies every 10 years, the average income of a Chinese will be doubled. So imagine a Chinese that is making, say, 5,000. 10 years later, it's gonna make 10,000. 10 years after that, 20,000. 10 years, 40,000. It means in 30 years, they're gonna be making the same amount that typical Americans are making today. The world is changing, and it's changing very fast. India, Brazil, and Turkey, and China, they have taken advantage of these new era, and they are preparing, they have devoted their national resources toward attainment of these goals. Let me show you those goals, if I may. Remember I told you that more than 100 countries, they signed a treaty to attain 8 major goals by year 2015. This is a very nice graphical device I would like to show you. It's called Millennium Development Goals. They were born out of the historic Millennium Declaration adopted by 189 countries at UN Millennium Summit in September of 2000. What does it include? 8 major goals. Take a look at a couple of these goals and you would see how important it is. Let me go to the English version of this. This graphical device, you could literally do it in 3 different languages. And I started, I think, in I do not know what the language is, but I think it's either French or whatever it is. So let me start here. Look, we'll get back to that picture. Here is the world. I show you certain statistics about how the world income distribution is and the changes that occurred. On this axis, you could see the daily income. So this is a person who is making $1 per day, meaning $365 per year. Okay? People who are making $10 per year, people who are making $100 per day. Take a look and see out of 6 billion people on the planet Earth, what percent are making a living on $1 a day? $1 a day. There are 6 billion people on the planet Earth. This this mountain represents the number of people on different income levels. See the portion, those top tail, very tiny minority of people make $100 per day or more. So if you have an average lifestyle in United States, you gotta be very happy. You are way better off than majority of the people on the planet Earth. Look at the majority of the people on the planet Earth. 80% of them, they make a living on less than $15 per day. 20% of the people on the planet Earth, that's 1,200,000,000 people who make a living on less than $1 per day. Repeat, $365 a year. That is the fate of 1,200,000,000 people, 20%. Let's see what has happened over the years. The data is going to go to a motion, like kind of motion picture, and it shows you from 1970 what happened. You could see that certain, and I'm going to get into specific countries, which countries attained better position. In 1990, the poverty rate had fallen to 26%, but due to population growth, the number of poor was the same. The UN goal is to have this proportion by year 2015. So, I don't want to take too much of your time. The world is very uneven, very much uneven. In order to have more kind of a just distribution of income, we gotta have plans. Take a look at the Millennium Goal. It's gonna take a second for it to run, but I promise you it is worth it to take a look at the Millennium Goal in English language and see how far off we are. Are we about at or above the stated goal to be attained by year 2015? Certain countries have already attained it, and certain countries unfortunately have not. Okay, here is the English version of it. Good. So, I told you that 189 countries, they basically signed the treaty. Here are the goals. To eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, there are 8 goals. To achieve universal primary education, to promote gender equality and empowering women, to reduce child mortality, to improve maternal health, to combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, and other diseases, to ensure environmental sustainability, and to develop a global partnership for development. Now take a look and see, like a race, we could take a look at different countries and see where did they start. Here is the start line, 1990. And let's see which region has achieved those goals, and then I'm going to talk about each of those balls are a region of the country, of the world. 1990 started. Year 2015, let's see which countries have attained those goals and which countries are way, way below it. For example, in regard to hunger. This is year 1990. These are all the countries and all the regions, different countries on the planet Earth. And let me put this into motion picture and see what happened, say, from that point on. You could see some countries had improved. When you go to the left, it means it exacerbated. It got worse. say this means negative 50. So the hunger, it dropped. You know which country is this? Where you have negative 550, five-fold worsening of the hunger situation. Guess where it is? That's Iraq. Where is this country? We again, Cuba, Venezuela. You see the relationship between dictatorship and this position? And take a look at the countries that already have surpassed the Millennium Goal. Okay. Let's take a look at a specific situation such as Iran and compare it with Iraq and see what happened from 1990. Both of them worsened off the hunger situation. Remember, here is 0%. This is 0% hunger. And here, toward right means attainment of the Millennium Goal. Okay, so here is 50% positive, 100%. So Iranian situation in each year, it got worsened, worsened, worsened. Of course, compared to Iraq, Cuba, oh, we could feel lucky, but still, you could see the situation. Now, let me also show you the other picture that I wanted to show you. Is very interesting. How much time do I have? Almost over. Okay, then forget about that one. Let me get to my main point here. Let me read you this quotation from Bill Gates. There is so much great stuff out there, but he says, my greatest fear is the digital divide, the lack of infrastructure for those countries that I showed you to reap the benefit of these potentials. Another important quotation that I chose, these are big names. The development created an opportunity to narrow the divide in coming years. The chance had to be seized quickly. If we do not catch it now, I don't think we'll ever catch it in the next several hundred years, when it's exactly like beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Hewlett-Packard, HP chief executive says, companies should seek to tackle the divide, digital divide, in their own self-interest rather than as a philanthropy, because today's poor countries are potential growth markets for tomorrow. Since I don't have too much time, I'm gonna eliminate some of this. Let me talk about what to do. So we know the problem. About 5% to 6% of the worldwide population has access to internet. 90% of them are in industrialized countries, 50% of them in the United States. Again, it shows significance of addressing the digital divide. Look at India's situation. The stated goal is to be an economic superpower by 2020. By the way, the population of India in 2015 is gonna surpass China. They have national planning to take advantage of all these young scientists, all these young engineers to, in this new information age society, to pave the way toward becoming an economic superpower. They set 8 to 9% growth as the annual requirement to double per capita income in the next 10 years. Read it again, double per capita income in the next 10 years. There are more than 1 million Indian high-tech experts in the advanced countries. We have the same situation. There are so many brilliant engineers, Iranian engineers, who are working around the world. And at the beginning of my lecture, I told you the importance of the wind of democracy. If that wind ever blew to Iran, all these young Iranians who are working in IT could do the same thing. After all, we do have the oil money too. There are certain, again, data that I do not want to, I want to quickly talk about some programs to close the gap. The programs by United Nations, here are the programs that many countries are taking advantage of funds to provide infrastructure and provide education to their children. This is one laptop per child. The one I told you about Turkey, this is it. It's called educational program, one laptop per child. The company is a US-based. It's a non-profit organization in collaboration with MIT. They could produce laptop at $100. So far, they were able to distribute 7 million laptops to Turkish kids. Making a long story short, to be able to survive, to be able to increase the standard of living in these days and age, there is one and only one way: to take advantage of human capital. The human capital means education. It means spending enough resources to educate people, to create certain technological infrastructure to be able to accommodate all the changes that are going on the planet Earth. So I'm sorry if my lecture took more time than I intended. If you have any questions later, I'll be happy to entertain. Thank you very much. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to.
So Iran specifically, I mean, there has been improvement in terms of literacy rates, college graduates, things like that. But how does that correlate with the ability to deal in an IT type of world? Is it
Thank you. I appreciate it.
there needs of graduates that are able to, and because you're saying that one of the solutions is to increase access to education, things like that, but I guess there's more to it, I'm sure. But how is Iran in that situation?
We, in a scale, in an index that UN gives for the internet infrastructure, we are number 92 on the planet Earth. So although there has been many positive changes, although the number of bloggers in Iran is almost higher than any other place, although there is an army of young, educated kids that are ready to start new era in Iranian economy, unfortunately, unless the other conditions are ready, like democratization of the economy. I'll give you one example. In China, in 1991, the rate of tariffs for export-import was 48%. They changed it to only 5%. The liberalization of the economy, not politically, economic liberalization. To be able to value intellectual property, to be able to have enough educational centers to foster these changes and to take advantage of these changes. Iran has the potential, Iran has the money, Iran has the young generation to be able to do it, but unfortunately, every program that I have seen is haphazard. They start something for 6 months in newspapers, they talk about national agenda for computers, and then like many other programs, they forget about it without really achieving anything.
Is it a question more of economic liberalization rather than democratization?
The question is the lack of will by the leadership to understand that resources should be redirected, resources should be allocated in the long run toward this process. We do not have that either recognition or the national will. Yes, sir. Turkey's economic progress has been called a miracle. I was in Turkey about 2 weeks ago. you could see it with your own eyes, the changes that has occurred. Remember that they don't have oil. Remember they do not have the comparative advantages that we do. But just this government, the Rajab Erdogan government, was able to double their per capita income in 5 years. It's an economic miracle. It's $5,000 now, which is much higher than many countries around them, and specifically a country that has no oil whatsoever. So they are progressing, specifically their national will to join European community. They have to do certain liberalization, but as you know, there are stumbling blocks in regard to Kurdish issue and the Armenian massacre and some other problems that they have to be able to internally first take care of it before they join the European community. But they are doing very, very good. And I saw it on the eyes of the young people there. They were so proud to be a Turk. You don't see that. In Iran, the latest data, sad data, every single year, this is from Iranian source, 300,000 people migrate. Out of 300,000, 170,000 of them are highly educated. In year 2000, the total number of Iranian professors was 1,800. In the same year, 2,200 Iranian professors, full-time, were working in American or Canadian universities. So unfortunately, there is no comparison. You're talking about a country that the leadership is half asleep, and you're talking about a neighborhood that, as I told you, the Turks are very, very aware of the situation. We could remember what the situation was in Gulf states. Now, they are also economic miracles. They can get all these educated Iranians who are exiting the country. Cellular technology, Iran did very good in the last 2 years compared to other countries of the region. But unless that cellular telephone is connected with the basic infrastructure for internet access, the use, the content, it will be used only for personal rather than being applied for reducing the cost and gaining economic advantage. Yes? I give you my email. I'll be happy to send you certain international indices that then you go ahead and compare them. On that graphical device I showed you, I could have done it. I could have done it. I could have shown you how AIDS affected Africa, but we didn't have time. Yeah. Yeah, regarding Turkey though, I was there 2 weeks ago. The tour guide was so proud to be a Turk. And he knew that in a country with no oil, they really have done the best. We have a proverb, تغاری بشکند، ماستی بریزد، جهان گردد به کام کاسه لیسان. Yes, ma'am. No doubt about it. As I told you, there were 4 trends that I identified. The most important trend was the winds of democracy. It's an undeniable positive correlation between degree of liberalization and democracy and the high standard of living and economic progress. What you have witnessed in the last 7 years, unfortunately, it is a little glitch in the economic history of United States. United States has so many positive potentials, very advanced infrastructure regarding banking, regarding educational system. So having about 7 years of the neocons would not be able to make a dent on that. Well, that was hopefully my point here. Thank you that you brought it up, that we are at the beginning of a new era comparable to industrial revolution. And if we cannot identify the trend and take advantage of the internal laws of those trends, the current situation of North and South, the dominance is going to exacerbate. All the divides that I talk about, the digital divide, knowledge divide, income divide, they will exacerbate otherwise.
Two questions. Number one is that if democratization is related to economic development, why after end of the general's government in Argentina, the economy of Argentina just slide down so steep, and in the past few years we have just been seeing the evasion of money from how do you
Because Argentina was already a victim of enormous amount of debt. It's like a person who inherits a debt from father, and no matter what they do for the time being, for a short period of time, their situation is going to get worse. But no doubt that in Latin America, South America, those that have benefited from the wind of democracy are doing way better than neighboring countries. I showed you the next country after Iraq was Cuba and then Venezuela. The absolute positive correlation between the degree of liberalization and democracy and economic attainment. Absolute, undeniable. I really do not know about Syria. I know, but I cannot explain it. I do not know. I have a habit of saying I do not know when I do not know. Yes, ma'am. In United States, the latest estimate shows that the contribution of IT accounts for 1/4 of the GDP. So those who are taking advantage of it in every front, from trade, commerce, banking, every aspect. The new era has e-learning, e-commerce, e-trade, e-anything. And on every single of those activities, in comparison to the past or in comparison to other countries who are not doing it, they can show a very positive resume. They can show you how this new technology could basically increase the standard of living, not just income, on every aspect, about health. Yes, ma'am. No, I don't doubt it, but I use different criteria.
Yeah, but I want to know what is the criteria of democracy that the United States has and economically so advanced. Why
I don't know how happy a person could be that is treated as a sheep, that for this guy, somebody else is making a decision. There is a communist party that if you don't belong to them, if you do not respect them, you could lose all your belonging. There are data. I don't think that in any country that is under dictatorship, they could really, you are saying that Cuba is not a dictatorship. You are saying that they can freely elect their government, unimpeded, and every person, every citizen, without a fear of being expelled, they could, let's agree to disagree. I respect your opinion, but that's diagrammatically 180 degrees different from what I know.
Americans go there to study medicine, and their medical system has the whole world speaking more than the United Nations or any other country, better than the United States.
And when the guy is sick, all of a sudden the brother becomes the next. Again, let's agree to disagree, because I totally disagree with that, but I respect your opinion. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate it.
Year at the University of Shiraz, right? Her research interests include women's ritual practices and Iranian cultural practices generally. Professor Bettridge's published work includes articles on women's religious gatherings, local pilgrimages, weddings, and gift givings in Iran. Anne Bettridge was executive director of the Middle East Studies Association of North America from 1990 to 2002. She has served as a member of the Executive Council of the Society for Iranian Studies, chair of the Executive Committee of the American Council of Learned Societies. ACLS, Conference of Administrative Officers, and member of the ACLS, member of the group of directors. Sorry, this is not. She is also a member of the Consultative Council of the Near Eastern Languages at Tufts University. And her title of the program today is The Frontiers of Knowledge Beyond the Center, What Can Be Learned from the Imamzadehs of Shiraz. Right? Thank you.
This work? Okay. Yatsi, yeah, I could stand up over here, and then if you'll be nice enough to do those for me. Great. I want to thank you all. Thanks. See, can you hear me all right? Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for coming. I'd like first, too, to thank Mr. Hassan Firouzi and Mrs. Firouzi so much for their kind invitation, and all of the good people who work with the Mehragan Foundation. They've done a splendid job, and I'm so honored to be part of this seminar. Now, what I'm going to talk about are some of the things that I learned in Shiraz in studying Imamzadehs. It might seem like an arcane subject. My professor, my advisor when I was a graduate student, was a student of ritual, an anthropologist, as I am, and he was focusing on Christian pilgrimage, and it seemed that it would be a good comparison. When I was in college, I lived in Athens, and a professor of mine who told me before I went to Athens, he showed me pictures of Isfahan. And he said, you know, if I were going as far as Greece, I would travel the rest of the way and go to Isfahan. Look what a beautiful place it is. So I had that in my mind. So when I lived in Greece and talked to my friends, I found another friend who wanted to go to Iran. So we traveled across to Turkey, got in buses, and we traveled across Turkey, went around Iran. This is a very long time ago, as two young American girls traveling around. But we had a very good time. So I had a very good feeling about Iran, and when it came time to choose a place to do my research as an anthropologist, all the pieces fit together, because pilgrimage is important in Iran. My advisor advisor was studying it, I could compare it, and I had liked Iran so much, I thought, all right, I'll start studying some Persian and get ready to go. And that's what I did. So when I was, a lot of the research that is about Iran focuses on the Tehran area. And also when people are journalists and they report about Iran, they often just focus on a very small part of Tehran and often on upper class Tehran. And people think that that is the sum total, at least foreigners who see the news and read books think that that's all there is. But in fact, there's a great deal else. And I think that if researchers go to other parts of Iran, they can learn a lot about what daily life is like. Please. Oh. Closer? Okay. Well, then we'll do away with that unpleasant noise. Well, I don't approach this as an historian. I'm not particularly interested in whether a shrine is the real burial place of someone or not. What I care about is what people think about, and how they behave. As an anthropologist, that's what concerns me. So I've spent a lot of time in Imamzadehs, going on pilgrimage to these local shrines. As a Portuguese author, José Saramago, has noted, every man has his own patch of earth to cultivate, and what's important is that he dig deep. And so once I chose the Imamzadehs of Shiraz to work on, I kept digging. Now, why Shiraz, too? I thought I would give you a little background. When I was choosing a place to go work, I thought as a single American woman at that time, trying to choose a place for research, Mashhad was so big and Imam Reza is so vast, if I didn't really understand very much, it would be hard for me to begin there. Qom was very conservative, and I thought, was a single young American woman going to Qom? That might not be such a good idea. This was in 1974. So Shiraz was the next because Shah Chiragh is there, and then the more I learned about it, the more it seemed that it would be a very comfortable, welcoming place, a good place to start, and later I could go to those bigger pilgrimage places once I really understood what was going on. So I picked Shiraz and started out there. Now, May, do you want to? Thank you. I also chose Shiraz because it has a lot of Imamzadehs. Here is a drawing that you see. I could get a copy. They were very commonly sold in Iran when I lived there. And the tree starts with all of the prophets, and then from Muhammad it goes out, and all the little leaves are the descendants of the various imams. So these are all the Imamzadehs, or at least many of them, certainly not all of them. But it gives you a sense of how very many there are. And a lot of them are in Shiraz. While some people know Shiraz as Darul Elm, an important cultural center, and home of the poets Hafez and Saadi, the Shiraz that I got to know best is what people there would call Borj al-Awliya. It's the citadel of the saints. One fellow told me that it's the earth of the saints and prophets because it has so many tombs in it, and that anywhere that you stick a shovel in the ground, you're going to find somebody's grave. So it seemed like a perfect place to be. As far as how many there are, when I was in Shiraz doing research long ago, in Edare Awqaf, I went and I checked their records. They had 112 Imamzadehs listed. I've been to about 90, and someone recently, I was in Shiraz last spring, and someone said they now have 130 in the Awqaf list. I didn't see it, so I don't know if that's true, but it gives you a sense of how many are registered. And new ones come forward all the time. It's a very dynamic system, so there's no set number. Also, some of them are destroyed, so it keeps moving up and down. Now, as for why there are so many Imamzadehs in Shiraz, people locally have their own explanation. They say that at the time that Imam Reza was living in Mashhad, that some of his supporters and relatives were moving towards, through Iran and towards what is now Mashhad to join him and be his supporters. But at that time, Imam Reza was poisoned in Mashhad, and the government was against him, and then they put an order out throughout Iran to kill all of his supporters. Now, Shirazis will say that a large number of his supporters, hundreds of them, if I hold this, maybe it'll be easier. Does that sound better? Oh, praise be. Okay. So they say that a lot of the supporters then hid in Shiraz, and one by one they got found out and killed. And so their graves are all over the city, and that's why there are so many of them. So anyway, that explains that one. Now, these Imamzadehs in Shiraz vary a great deal, one from the other. And for instance, Here I am at Imamzadeh Kazaruni in Shiraz. I'm just sitting there rummaging through my bag, but just shows you. Okay, Mehdi, do you want to? Yeah, if you're in Shiraz and look out over the downtown in the old part of the city, you'll see domes of the very important shrines. Here you see Shah Chiragh and Sayyid Mir Muhammad. This is a map that shows some of them, but you can see how they're very localized in the old part of the city. I've numbered the ones that are most important, but there are lots of others. But what used to be the city gates go around that area, and that was the old downtown. There are a couple now that are outside too, and there are some even further away. But it gives you a sense, again, of the concentration of these shrines in the city. Now, some of the shrines are very small, they're locked. It's very hard, if you want to visit them, you ask the stores around and somebody probably has a key and will let you in. But they're not open all of the time. And when I asked people why they were closed so much, they said, well, if we just leave it open, kids go in there, they mess around, or other people might go in and do some not so good things in these places which are kind of, off on the side of things. So it's better to lock them until we have a real reason to be there. But if anyone wants to see them and do ziyarat or visit the shrine, that's okay. We'll get the key and open it and let them in. But when you walk around the old part of the city, you see lots of these green doors and places locked, and often, as here, they're marked with the name of the Imamzadeh. There's another one of the ones I went to just year before last when I went back for a visit. Though I haven't spent a lot of time there in recent years, I do go back for visits, and I like to go back and just see what's happening to the shrines. So one of the things I can show you is what's changed over the last 30 some odd years. Now this is you can tell that this shrine is not in very good shape just by the way that his Imamzadeh Sayyid Nur Muhammad is written there on the wall. And when you see the shape that he's in, there's a little box for money, and then they're fixing the tomb there in the back, but this has been going on for years, and people are not paying a whole lot of attention. Mostly it's people's own money, the neighbors, who are taking care of that one. But people still come and pay him a visit, and then leave. Can you get the next one? Okay, maybe that. If you put enter on that. Okay. Some of the small shrines are very well maintained, and if they're buildings of historic importance, then Awqaf and the government, and Miras Farhangi, the cultural organization, are very concerned to maintain them. This, as a contrast with Sayyid Nur Muhammad, this is Imamzadeh Zanjiri, which is attached to Masjid Nasir al-Mulk. It's a very beautiful little shrine, very well maintained, and it's been fixed up in recent years, just to show you the contrast. This is inside by the courtyard of this little shrine. That's some of the painting on the wall. They've just recently restored it, and it's really very beautiful. This is another contrast for you. I'll leave this picture up for a little while. People do regard these shrines as some of them are considered more legitimate than others. They're not all the same. And when I talk to people about it, they would say, well, they're like us. There are people who are very upper class and very rich, and there are people who are not so wealthy and don't receive as much attention, and they're no different from the rest of us. In fact, people have a very personal relationship with the Imamzadehs. So when you see a small back street shrine like this and it's got green cloth draped over it, that green cloth is something that people have brought as a kind of present for the person who's buried there, but they don't call it a piece of cloth. I was in one shrine, if you want to, I think it's the next one here, we'll see. No, it isn't, but anyway, could you go back? Yeah, with a shrine where there was a tomb not unlike this, and the Mutawalli was talking, the guardian was talking to a lady who had come in and brought some green cloth, and he said, well, it's nice of you to have brought a shirt for the agha, a piran for the agha, and that's what they call this green cloth. It's like bringing clothes as a present. But he said, he's got enough clothes, and what we really need are light bulbs. So the next time you come, would you please be kind enough to bring some light bulbs? But so there's a very practical aspect to it too, but also a very personal one. People do have very personal relationships with these Imamzadehs. Some Imamzadehs too are very wealthy, as I said, and if you want to put the next one. This is Shah Chiragh at the time of Nowruz 2 years ago. Lots and lots of traffic, people coming and going, but it gets extremely crowded there. Okay. This is another one that indicates another aspect of Imamzadehs. Not only are people knowing them as individuals and very close to them, but they also have specialties. This is Sayyid Abdullah, which is right off Bazar Vakil. And in Sayyid Abdullah, his specialty is helping ladies get pregnant. If a woman wants to get pregnant, they can go there, vow, walk around. And when I asked why, I was told that when he was killed, at that time when all of these relatives of Imam Reza were killed, his wife was with him and she was pregnant. They were both killed at the same time. So they're very concerned about the problems of pregnant women, and they're particularly likely to respond to those requests. My mother-in-law, who was not someone not superstitious in the least, but I said, well, did you ever go to Sayyid Abdullah? And she said, of course I did. I said, well, why did you go? That's not really the kind of thing she usually did. She said, well, my husband told me it was very good for pregnant women to walk. It's much healthier, then you'll have a better childbirth, it'll be much easier for you, and exercise is the point. So she walked all the way to the bazaar and back and to Sayyid Abdullah, but that was her explanation. But in fact, a lot of people still go there, and it's developing, getting bigger, has a little mosque now attached to it. Okay. Now, one of the questions is, how do you know a real Imamzadeh from a fake one? And people talk about this a lot. There are lots of jokes about fake Imamzadehs. People have a nice sense of humor about them. But the ones that are considered real have usually one of two or both of two things. They'll have a loh, a kind of carved stone that indicates that this is indeed the grave of an Imamzadeh, and people put a lot of faith in these stones. If you don't have one of them, you're not really a legitimate Imamzadeh. The other thing is that you have to have miracles. If you don't answer people's requests for things, and people don't come to believe in you, then you're easily done away with, very easily destroyed. And this does happen to some shrines. Here's a lady sitting in front of her doorway. Inside her house was a little tomb. She said it was the Imamzadeh Sayyid Hussein, and I visited her 30 years ago and saw this shrine. And then when I was there the last 2 times, I went to try and find it, and I couldn't find it. And it finally became evident. I got out my maps from 30 years ago and now, and they had destroyed it in an urban renewal project. Now it's completely flattened there. They've taken out all the houses. And I thought, well, how could they destroy an Imamzadeh if people believe in them so much? I looked back in my notes. There was no loh, no nothing. And she said, nobody really comes here. I mean, I invite people in, but people don't come much. So it wasn't having miracles, and it didn't have the carved stone to prove its legitimacy. So it was very easy for the government to just flatten it and do away with it. This is another one that I looked for last time I was there. This is Bibi Khairul Nisa. When I went to find it, it's in the middle, it was 30 years ago, in the middle of an empty yard south of a major shrine, and people didn't go there. Little kids took care of it, and they played in it. But you could see it's just scrawled on there, Imamzadeh, and I had to go down underground and see inside. Little children took me there because I had to go over a fence and under and then and down in the ground. But now, again, there's an apartment building on it. This was not something that had anybody really believing it or taking care of it. It didn't have a loh, so they could, the land became worth more. And so that was the end of the grave of Bibi Khairul Nisa. This shows you an area between the shrine of Shah Chiragh and then going back to the shrine of, it's called Asune, where they have taken out all of the old neighborhood. Some of these beautiful old neighborhoods are completely flattened, and they're building a new area they call Bain al-Haramain. Now they're building lots of shops, and it's going to be a sort of commercial religious combined with religious center between these two shrines. And this area, it shows you the extent of the renovations that are going on in the city, and this is happening in different parts of the old city. At the end, I'll show you something rather surprising that's also going on there. Okay. When I was there some 30 years ago, there was a shrine in the middle of the street. And so I asked people about it, and they said, well, we were digging to widen the street, and we found the loh, and so we had to respect it. So they built the shrine over this place, and I said, well, are you going to make a building? And they said, well, we don't know. It depends on the Shahrdari. Are we going to be given permission to build a whole building? Or they said, for now, they told us this is all we can do. We can make a roof for it, and that's it, because they have to decide, what's legitimate. And I have a picture of it the way it was last year, so you can see what happened. They still haven't given permission for an entire building, but he's gotten a much nicer sort of covering, but it's something that could be done away with. But this, but still they haven't destroyed it, and the street still goes around it, but they've built an area more for it. And a lot of people visit it, and it's very near the shrine of Asune, Sayyid Alauddin Hussein, so I doubt that they would be able to destroy this one. This is outside Shah Chiragh, in its courtyard at the time of Nowruz. You can see the little decorations there, but lots and lots and lots of people visit it. That's the most wealthy shrine, and people told me that it's kind of the senior shrine in town, and yet it's not the most popular one, which is interesting. I said, if you want to go to who gives the most miracles, who's most Murad Dehande, they'd say, not Shah Chiragh, there's another one. And I think it's an interesting sort of contrast to see how it is that people feel about them and what they think works. There's another picture, just shows you outside Shah Chiragh, a lot of people were getting their pictures taken for Nowruz and visiting. People, in addition to having these kind of formal relationships with Shah Chiragh, one lady I know who lives near there regards him, her daughter was saying, my mother regards him as more important than her relatives. So that when it, for instance, is Ashura, she will go to pay her condolences. She first goes to Shah Chiragh to say Tasliyat, because one of his relatives has died. And at Nowruz, she first goes to Shah Chiragh to wish him a happy new year, because he's like the elder of the city. Then she goes and visits her own relatives. So these are people that people know. It's not as though they're dead. They talk to them, they request things from them. It's a whole society unto itself. Now, the society is, the bonds between people and the Imamzadehs is reflected also in the way their relatives are combined with them. 2 years ago at Nowruz, I went to Ali ibn Hamzeh, another shrine in Shiraz, and there were people cleaning the graves. This is on the day of Nowruz, and you can see the sabzi, the little pots of wheat that people have sprouted and put on the graves. And in asking people about it, they said, well, it's Nowruz, we want to celebrate with our family. So what goes on in the shrines is not always sad. One of the things that I think is a misunderstanding about Iranian culture that people get from watching the news, whenever they see something religious, it's always mourning, it's always people beating themselves, it's always people wearing black, azadari, crying. But when you go to the shrines, people are in fact often having a very good time, they celebrate. This was Nowruz, and they were there putting flowers out, distributing candy to their friends, but these are not the things you see in the news. People concentrate on just one particular kind of thing, and I think it really does represent a misunderstanding of Iranian culture. Now, there's another kind of change apart from just destroying shrines. Many of the shrines in Shiraz are Imamzadehs, the descendants of Shiite Imams. There are others that are Sufi shrines that are very important. The people who were either Sufi saints or people who were scholars who wrote very important books about Sufism. And there's one place in Shiraz called Haftan that's to the north of the city. There are 7 dervishes buried there. When I used to visit 30 some odd years ago, there was an old dervish there. Dervishes would meet there, and it was a place kind of far off north of the university. There were lots of trees, and nobody was taking very good care of the building, which was very beautiful, but it was a place that had a certain spiritual significance for people who believed in those things. Nowadays, it's very well taken care of. It's been taken over by the cultural heritage organization, Miras-e Farhangi, and they've planted the garden, they've made it very pretty, they're taking care of the building. You can see the paintings that are around in the porch. There's one of a dervish there. It's really a very lovely place to visit. But they've changed it. When the cultural organization took it over, they altered it, and they now call it the Stone Museum. So you see carved stones from all over Fars are brought and put around in the courtyard. At the time that I went there were no labels, no explanation, nothing. Just very arbitrary placing of stones all around in the courtyard. And I thought, well, what's going on? They were distancing this place from its significance as a Sufi place. They wanted it to be associated with something other than tasawwuf, The government doesn't like that, and so they're pretty much changing the meaning by putting all these stones around. In my opinion, those seemed like just an excuse for, and I said, well, where's the old dervish who used to live here? Is there anyone else like that here anymore? And they said, oh, no, they're not here anymore. They're up the hill. They've moved up. And could you go back, let's see, back 2 slides. Now, if you look way up the hill, there's another building up there. They told me they had gone up there. And I said, oh, well, I'll go visit them. They said, no. You don't want to do that. They don't want to see you. They don't like visitors. You shouldn't go. But really trying to keep people away from this sort of thing. So you want to go back forward again? So they have stones placed here and there, higgledy-piggledy, around in the building. People selling khatam. It's a tourist place. It's very pretty, but the meaning has been changed. So it still is a place that is a place of burial that's respected, but the government has put a slightly different twist on the meaning. Do you want to go to the next one? Now here is one shrine also called Haftan that is in Shiraz to the south of a major shrine called Al-Sunay. When I went to visit there, it was underground. There are 7 graves underground at this one. And at the time that I went, there were young ladies there. People looking at this picture might think this is where Iran is now, but this was 30 some odd years ago. Some things haven't changed that much. They were having a Quran reading class. And so they asked me to take their picture. And it's around one of the graves that is there. I have one more picture of it. But one of the other things that I saw in this Haftan shrine was that there is an older woman sitting in the corner crying, and she was weeping and weeping. So I went over I asked them, I said, what's wrong? And they said, oh, it's so sad. Her son has been in a car accident. He's in the hospital. He's in intensive care. And we're not sure how it's going to turn out, but she can't be with him because he's in the ICU. So she came here to be comforted. And so I went and sat with her, and then I watched and asked her about it. So she told me about her son, and I think that helped. But I noticed everyone who came in the shrine would come sit with her, talk with her, and comfort her. And she told me that when she was at home, she was crying so much. The family finally said, we've really had enough of this crying. It doesn't help us much. So they got to a limit of what they could do for her. People think of people's families as being the ones that comfort them and take care of them the most, but sometimes families too have limits in what they can do. One of the fellows at Idare Awqaf that I used to see said, our Imamzadehs are like psychiatrists. People go to them, they talk to them, they empty out their worries, they feel better. This is what we do. And in fact, for this woman who was going there, she knew that in going to that shrine, there would be people there who would talk to her, that she could say whatever she wanted, and I think it really did make her feel better. A lot of people talk about going to shrines because they want to feel that kind of calm that's very hard to come by otherwise. So it's not only that people feel about shrines as though the people there are their relatives, but they're also places where people come together. And that social aspect of shrine visiting is extremely important, and one of the reasons I think that it's so popular. When I talked about shrines with some people, there's one lady I visited with who said, oh, well, they're just like their own relatives, they're like their dear ones, it's so close. But as I told you, not all of them are regarded as being quite the same. This is the one that people told me would give the most responses to people's requests. It's the most Murad Dehande, not Shah Chirag, but this one, Sayyid Alauddin Hussain. Now, I asked, why would he be more than Shah Chirag? Shah Chirag is so important. They said, well, Shah Chirag's a little, he was just sort of too important for people to feel close to. But they said, there's a story about this one. The story is that one of these descendants of Imams, who was in Shiraz at the time that what people called Sayyid Koshi started, then they sent out the word to kill all of these relatives of Imams who were going through to meet Imam Reza, that one of them was a very young man. He was just, some people said 11, some said 13, and he was hiding in a garden, and he climbed up in a tree to hide. And during the night, he would come down to get something to eat and something to drink, and then he would go back in the tree during the daytime so they wouldn't find him. Well, someone saw him and reported him, and then when he came down the next time, the government representatives were there and they hacked him to pieces. And he died right there and was buried. And people told me because he's so young, he's very tender-hearted, and anything you ask him for, you'll get. So that's different from an old, senior fellow like Shah Chirag. So people will go to this place. In fact, they call it Asune, which, it's all shrines are called astane, or a threshold, a holy threshold. And when anthropologists study pilgrimages, they think of thresholds as very important, that when people cross those thresholds, you get into a kind of space in which changes can take place, transformations can occur, miracles can occur. And the fact that, if you go to Imam Reza, it's Asane Ghots, but this one, people call it just Asune. It's like it's the threshold, the most important threshold in Shiraz, because this is where most miracles will take place. So when you talk to most folks and you ask for it, you don't ask for Sayyid Alauddin Hussein. You just say, where's Asune? And they'll send you in this direction, even though all Imamzadehs are Asune. It's just another close-up picture of it. You can see it's expanding, though, all over the place. They've now built a huge theater-like space in the back because they have very large collective rituals there, bring a lot of people in for speeches. They've built a clinic next to it where poor people can go and get medical attention. They separated the women's and the men's quarters. People go for fun, though. As I said, while foreigners often, when they look at Iran and Shiism, think of all the mourning and all these people wearing black and these desperately sad things, in fact, people have a lot of fun with the religion and the Imamzadehs. In Shiraz, different important shrines have days of the week and times of the week when you're supposed to visit them. So this one is, I believe it's Shab-e Doshanbe. You're supposed to go on Monday Eve to this shrine. And Shah Chirag is always on the eve of Friday. Shab-e Jomeh is when you go there. But different shrines all have different times, so you know where to go when you want to see a lot of people. So on this Shab-e Doshanbe, when you go to Asune, there are people selling things, selling ice cream, selling clothing. They bring things like the little Ferris wheel in the background so children can play. And so people go there, and it's almost like a party. But that's on a weekly basis. And by the same token, if you want a quiet atmosphere and you just want to go and just sit in a quiet, contemplative, meditative space, you avoid that time because you know this time is going to be very busy. One lady I knew said, well, I told her I was going to Asune, and she said, don't go today, it's going to be too busy. For you as a foreigner, you won't like it. And I thought, well, that's just what I want. So I went anyway and took these pictures. Yeah, next one. This is another fellow. These, you can see they're set up on temporary tables and things on the floor, but they take them, again, to Asune just this one day of the week. Another day, they'll go somewhere else. But it's something that just moves through the city. But it really is a very nice time and a lot of fun. This is a shrine that is an old one. They recently put the dome on, but it's Sayyid Tajuddin Gharib. He's supposed to be a descendant of Hazrat Abbas, the half-brother of Imam Hussein. And this place has a different specialty. You met Sayyid Abdullah, who helps people get pregnant. At Asune, he'll give you anything, but he's especially good at curing children's diseases because he was a child himself when he died. These correspondences, people know these Imamzadehs pretty well. But at this one, people would traditionally go there to swear oaths. People told me, well, we didn't have the same kind of court then. So if you had a business associate and you wanted to, sign a document, or you wanted someone to swear an oath that what they said was true, you would go do it in this shrine. I said, well, why here? They said, well, if they lied, Hazrat Abbas would basically cause them a lot of trouble. Now, I asked why that was true, and he said, the fellow who was the Motawali said, well, Hazrat Abbas was not really an imam. He's related to Imam Hussein, but he's his half-brother, and so he's not as gentle and kind as the Imam. So he's somebody that's a lot tougher. So for swearing the oath, this is where you would go. And I said, well, have you seen anyone suffer from this? He said, years ago, one fellow came and swore an oath in the courtyard of the shrine, and he lied and he died right then and there, right in the shrine. I said, and I asked him, I said, have you seen this lately? And he said, well, no. Nowadays we live in an age of deceit. People are used to lying, there's a lot of corruption, and so it takes longer for Hazrat Abbas to get people. He said, he will get them eventually. But you know, we're living in hard times and bad things happen. And I thought, well, he's exaggerating a little, but it was entertaining and I liked him. I used to go visit him a lot and talk to him and would just spend time in this shrine, which is a very nice one. You can see the beautiful old tile work. Here's a picture in the tile work of Hazrat Abbas. There are lots of pictures of him around, and it's very typical of Shiraz tile with the blue and pink colors. Very pretty. This is something else at that shrine I wanted to show you. When I went 2 years ago, I was really surprised. This is after the revolution, I hadn't been back to Shiraz for a long time. You know, there was the war, I had kids, you know, life was difficult, so I didn't go back for a long time. But when I went back in 2006 and went right away to visit to see what had happened to the shrines, I was surprised that they have this kind of divider, and they do this in all of the really major shrines. They divide women's space from men's space. So it used to be that you could just walk around and people would go, you know, to do their circumambulation of the shrine. Now women would go on the left and men to the right. You'll notice that the doors are on the men's side because you open them, that's where you get the money out. And the motivali of that shrine, the guardian, is usually a man, or always has been, I think. And so those things are on the man's side, so he could comfortably go clean out the shrine, you know, get the money out, get the letters out, whatever had been sent to the shrine. So, which kind of disturbed me, and I was brindling against it, thinking, you know, the ladies are constrained over here. That's not fair. Why can't we go around? Of course, the men can't go around either. But the people there didn't seem to care. And honestly, people would still go in, pray, hang out with their friends. They could hear whatever was going on the men's side. Sometimes in the back they had a railing like that, and they had put a green canvas over it. They were building something fancier. At Shah Chirag now they have very fancy ones with frosted glass and silver work that's very beautiful, but still dividing the space between the men's and women's space. At Asune it's the same thing. At very little shrines, you know, they don't get that crowded, nobody worries about it, and they don't build these kinds of fences. But anyway, you see that. But to get back to Sayyid Haji Gharib and that Mutawali who told me how he was worried about, you know, times changing and things being difficult. This last time I went to visit the shrine, I found his grave in the courtyard. And I was really upset because that's the same man I used to go visit. And there was his picture. And it turned out that he was murdered in the shrine. Someone came to rob it. So his concern about times changing, about people not being so good, also the economy was not so great and people are very needy, and there was a fair amount of thievery, but it's something, you know, his own worries were accurate. You know, this was 30 years after I had been talking to him. He was killed in 1996. You know, a long time after. But it was really sobering to me to see, and they say that they called him Shahid, you know. Here's another kind of shrine I wanted to show you, just as far as how people think about holy places. This is one that used to be just a kind of field with a little place people would visit, but where people thought that Hazrat Abbas had stepped. He'd visited there and his footprint was left. He had come and helped somebody out. It was a miracle and the footprint remained, and so they built a shrine around it. It's a very popular place in Shiraz, and I wanted to show you something of what it's like inside and how it's been fixed, so you can see now how shrines are doing. This is inside. You can see the tile work is really very fancy, and on posts outside there are lots of chadors piled up, because a lot of ladies don't wear chador, they just have their scarves and manteau or something. But there are lots of chadors. You can just grab one and wear it to go in. I never knew how clean those were. I always take my own chador, but you know, a lot of people can use those. This is the mirror work inside the dome, just so you get a sense of how elaborate it is for a small local shrine. It's not only Imam Reza that gets this kind of elaboration. This, I think, is interesting because where usually you see the zari around a tomb, and it's a rectangular shape, this is around a footprint. And so it's a very different kind of shape. But people take it seriously, they still walk around, they treat it just the way they would treat a tomb of someone. But if you ask them, they say, oh no, it's a footprint. And I asked one lady, I said, well, how do you know? She said, no, the footprint was really left there. And I said, well, how do you know it's Hazrat Abbas's footprint? She said, well, it's written on it. And I don't know anyone who's really seen it, but she just had a great deal of faith in the fact that this is real. And here's a picture. It was Nowruz, so on the side there was a table, everything set up with the sabzi, and a picture of Hazrat Abbas there behind it. So again, people are celebrating. It's very colorful, very pretty. It's not very mournful in the way that people often think of Shiism. This is another kind of celebration. This particular celebration is one that is also at Sayyid Tajuddin Gharib. People sometimes say Sayyid Haj Gharib, the one where the man was killed in the courtyard where Hazrat Abbas was. This was the birthday of the 12th Imam. And so for the birthday, they were celebrating. Everyone had decorated for 3 nights. There were decorations. They even had a table of cookies and things set out. And I asked people about it, and they said, well, he's still alive, and he might come to the party. We've got to be ready. So it was, but again, it was a sense of a lot of fun that people were having. Here's the sweets they put out for the party. There are new shrines being developed. When I was in Shiraz 2 years ago, some friends told me that there was a new one outside of town, but it's in a new kind of neighborhood that's being developed. Shiraz has a lot of suburbs that are being built out in areas where it used to just be gardens. So this is out in that area. I cynically think that people who like to visit shrines, they don't always want to go downtown. It's really very convenient to have one out where you live. But it's one that people really like, and they say that it really grants a lot of people's requests. It's very Murad Dehande, and people visit it on Mondays especially. I went there with one friend of mine, and there's an old dervish there, and she said, don't give him any money, don't give him any money. And I said, excuse me? She said, I'll tell you later. So he came over and put a little kind of green ribbon around my wrist and wanted money, of course, but then chatted. They've built a mosque on the side. It's developing quite a lot. I asked her later about it when we were leaving, saying, what's going on? And he said, she said, you should see him with some of my friends. She was much younger than I am. She's the daughter of some friends of ours. She said he likes to sort of grab the wrist of the young ladies, and he kind of massages their arm while he's tying the thing on. And she said he's just awful. So, we really shouldn't give him any money at all. But the fact is that these new shrines do get built, and it's just a question of what people believe in. Someone had seen a light there, they built something, and if miracles get granted, then the building goes up, and after that it's very hard to move. There's one story I was told years ago about what are called Imamzadeh Nafti. I don't know if you've heard of these oil Imamzadehs, that in the south, the story was, and again, I don't really care if it's true or not, it's the stories that people tell me and the content of the stories that interests me as an anthropologist. But they said when the British were first down south and were exploring for oil, they would put metal posts where they thought it was a good place to drill for oil, where it looked likely. Then they would go away, the villagers would come, see the nice metal post, take it out of the ground and run off with it because it was very useful. So they thought, what can we possibly do to make sure that we can leave some kind of sign and come back and find it? Someone said, well, nobody will mess with an Imamzadeh. So they built little tiny Imamzadeh-like structures on these places where they thought they would come back later and drill for oil. The problem was when they came back later, people would say, you can't drill there, it's an Imamzadeh. So this sense of faith and who believes in what can get you into trouble. But there are lots of jokes about Imamzadehs. The thought that if you have an Imamzadeh in your village, that it gives you a certain status, as well as it brings pilgrims, and they bring money, and this is all very good for the local economy. I had one student, I taught 1 year at what was then Pahlavi University, now Shiraz University, and one of my students said, oh, you're interested in Imamzadehs. I have an uncle who made Imamzadehs. I said, oh, he was a builder? He said, well, not really. He said he would go and do research and find out which villages did not have Imamzadehs. Then he and his friends would carve a loh, one of these stones, antique it, make it look old, and then bury it when no one was watching, and later arrange for it to be dug up. Say, look, an Imamzadeh, and then they would build it. They would get paid for building the building, and then the Imamzadeh would be happy because they had, the village would be happy because they had an Imamzadeh and they wouldn't have to go to the next village. So I'm not sure what's true, but people think about these things, they joke about them, they have a very nice sense of humor. Okay. Here's another picture of this Imamzadeh Kandili. Now we're getting towards the end of some of these things I wanted to show you. This is again that area looking towards Asune where they were, this is 2 years ago. They were digging it out to make Bain al-Haramain, and they dug down 2 or 3 stories deep to build really strong foundations for these new buildings in Bain al-Haramain that are going to be shops and madraseh and lots of sort of a religious complex, but with that commercial aspect too. And a lady I knew said, "Did you see the Imamzadeh in the middle of that dug out space?" I said, "No, I didn't see it. It was, all grown over and they hadn't been finishing the work yet." She said, "There's an Imamzadeh in there." Now, I was determined to find it. I went and I looked and I couldn't see it. So, but I did take my map of that area, and in that area where they had cleaned it out, I knew there used to be several Imamzadehs. I identified 1 or 2 on the edges of this pit, but there were another couple that I couldn't find them. So this year I went back. Now you can look through here and you see through that pit, it's all nice and cleaned off. And you want to do the last one? And this is what's happened. There is one Imamzadeh in the middle of this area that they're cleaning out. I had asked a guard who was a little guard post right near there. I'm not quite sure why they're so careful about the guarding, but I said, "I'd really like to take a picture of this, may I?" And he said, "Sure, go take whatever you want." So I took pictures, and then I said, "What is the name of this Imamzadeh?" He said, "Oh, I can't remember, but he said, well, there's Imamzadeh Argiz over there, and Imamzadeh Fulan is there." And I said, "I know all those. What's this one?" And he said, "Well, it has a really nice name. It's something ad-Din." And I went back and looked in my notes, and there was a Sayyid Jalal ad-Din that was right about in that area that I had visited years ago. It was a very pretty little shrine with a courtyard. 2 sisters lived in it. They said they had been born there right next to the tomb because their family lived in that one room. And they would see this fellow, the Imamzadeh, come to them in their sleep, in their dreams. It's very common for people to dream about Imamzadehs. Sometimes they get advice. Sometimes they, just have that kind of visit. But they said he was young. They said he was about 11 years old. And I said, "Well, how do you know?" And they said, "Well, we saw him." And they really took it very personally. They lived with him, they knew him, would describe him in great detail. And so when I went and realized that this little, small structure that they've saved, just the tomb, and you can see that they went to great lengths to shore it up, to put cement, to make a cellar house when, lots of things are going up around. But there it is, and I look forward to seeing how it's developed. One thing that I think is very important that becomes so clear when people study Imamzadehs, that's an independent trait of Iranian culture, and I think is really at the heart of what goes on in a lot of Iran, whether it's to do with Imamzadehs or anything else. When I would talk to people about how they felt about the Imamzadehs, they said, "Well, it's just a matter of muhabbat. There's affection. We care for them so deeply, just as the Imamzadehs care for us." And I think that that's something that is very common to Iranians, that there's a kind of importance given to personal relationships that you don't necessarily find elsewhere. Certainly in the West, with everybody being so busy and running around, I don't think that the relationships have that same quality of giving real personal attention to individual people in the way that Iranians do. And I think that this comes through in the way that people treat Imamzadehs, but I think it's equally true of the way that Iranians treat one another. And so it's something that really stands out. It's not necessarily when people look at studying religious and other kinds of activity in Iran, especially as I said before, with foreigners, they concentrate on what's negative, on what's violent, on what's unhappy. But in fact, there's a very deep strain of giving importance to affection that comes through in poetry. And people talk about love, they talk about affection. These are the themes that are really very powerful. And when you go to Imamzadehs, those same themes stand out. So I'd simply like to leave you with that. Also, I think this is a good example of the ingenuity of people. You know, if people set their minds to doing something, they do it no matter how crazy it might seem. And so there you have Sayyid Jalaluddin waiting for the rest of the city to catch up with him. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much. If anyone has questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Yeah. Right. Pardon? It's after the revolution. Yeah. Yeah, before that, I used to go and visit, and people were all mixed up together, jostling together, trying to get close to the Zari. This is just post-revolution that they've got these, nowadays or something set up to separate the men from the women. And as I said, it initially bothered me a lot, but didn't seem to bother anyone else. Partly, some of them had grown up there and had never seen anything else, and other people have just gotten used to it. Yes, sir, yes? Well, I was in Iran, how many months ago? 4 months ago? So this picture is from 4 months ago. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Right. Mm-hmm. They're just sort of like the Nafti. Uh-huh. If you have examples you could tell me about later.